if I have an idea for a character or a moment and somebody goes, that just doesn't make any sense. This character would never do that. And if the argument is good, then change it.
This episode is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage, where screenwriters go to get their scripts read by top Hollywood professionals. Learn more at covermyscreenplay.com. I'd like to welcome to the show, Naren Shankar. How you doing, Naren?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I've watched many of your shows over the years. You have a very unique story on how you got to where you are, and hopefully it's going to inspire some people along the way. So, first question, sir.
All right.
Why, in God's green earth, did you decide to go into the film business when you have a real degree with real skills that could actually help the world?
Wait, are you my parents? Oh my God. I did have kind of a strange path into the business. I started in when I went to university. I started as undecided, pre-med, medieval studies, classics, French literature. I didn't know what I wanted to do. My dad was a doctor. And so I told my parents I was going to be pre-med. I didn't really want to be a doctor. And I spent the first 2 years at Cornell in the College of Arts and Sciences. But in that time, I started thinking about, what happens after college? And I was like, I don't think any things I really love are going to get me any kind of job. So I had always loved math and science. I think I'm a generalist at heart. And so I transferred into the College of Engineering and the College of Applied Engineering Physics. And I ended up staying all the way into the doctoral program. So I stayed at Cornell. So as I was, in the midst of writing my dissertation and working in the lab, I just started going back to the things I loved, which were history and literature. And I just started taking more and more courses in the arts college. And I literally remember the moment where I was coming out of this amazing course told by a professor, a guy named Walter Lefebvre. He's an amazing historian. He taught a 2-semester course in the history of American foreign policy. And we had this amazing lecture about the early republic and Aaron Burr. And I walked out of the hall and I was going back and I could see my lab sort of on the other end and across down the street in another quad. And I was like, God, I just don't want to be an engineer. And I think what it was part of what happens when you're in the hard sciences is you end up becoming more and more of an expert in a smaller and smaller corner of the universe. And I think that's what was happening with me. It's like I had this, I was doing this thing and it was really, and it was my thing, and you're adding, original research to the world, which is the whole point of a PhD program. But it just wasn't the thing that kind of jazzed me. It's like, and I had also very early on, my sophomore year, my freshman year and sophomore year, I had joined the Kappa Alpha Literary Society, which is a Greek letter social fraternity, but it's also a literary society. And you do every 2 weeks, the members would meet and we would, do original writing and present it to the rest of the gang. It was a very nerdy, geeky fraternity. It's like really, but I think those are the things that really got me excited, and the friends I was around, we loved movies and television. So after I finished my thesis, I had some friends out in the business who had come out to LA and were breaking into the show business side of things. And they said, come out to LA and be a screenwriter. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I'll do that. And
it's super easy. It's super easy. You'll be fine.
Oh, ignorance is strength is like for me, it was literally because I had no concept of how high the bar was or how difficult it is to break into the business. Had I known those things, I might not have come. But I had skipped a couple of grades when I was really young. And so I started college. I just turned 16. I had my parents, I told my parents, just let me do this. And my parents, I think, felt like, oh, he'll just get it out of his system and then he'll go and do something sensible because, it's a good Indian kid is like doctor, lawyer, engineer, businessman. It's like those are the only things that are okay, So
screenwriter, not so much.
there's no tradition of it. There's no idea of what that means even. It's like, who's going to pay you for that? I mean, and so
to write, I can write. Why? Who's going to pay me? So no one's going to pay you.
Exactly. So, but they were so sweet and they were so supportive, and and I came out and sorry to make this such a long story, but it was, in my fraternity in Kappa Alpha, my best friend was Ron Moore, who created Battlestar Galactica, and he, at the beginning of his career, he was actually a political science major, and we had a third friend who was the guy who wanted to come out to LA and be in the business, and so he went out. He dragged Ron out there a couple of years later after Ron decided he didn't know what to do with his life. And then a couple of years after that, Ron convinced me to come out, and I slept on his couch for like 8 weeks. And so that was literally the chain that brought me in. And through Ron, I got a spec script to Star Trek: The Next Generation that brought me to the attention of the producers. And then that led to a Writers Guild internship on the program, and that really was the start of it. It led to a staff job a little while after that. So that's the long story. So
obviously, like a standard plan that every screenwriter goes through.
Exactly.
I could only imagine the conversation with your parents, because I know the conversation that I had. But I didn't have a PhD in engineering and applied physics.
My mom was so sweet. Years later, after things were going well, it's like, because I remember, like, I just threw like some suitcases and stuff in my car, and I drove out of sight. My parents were like waving goodbye. Years later, my mom said, as soon as your car got out of sight, I burst into tears.
I would too. I have kids. I would too. I would be like, no. Oh my God. I get that, because that's one of the reasons I wanted you on the show. I'm like, how in God's green earth did this engineer and physics, get into writing for television? It just made no sense.
There's a part of it that is actually, I think that's like, self-knowledge is somewhat important, is that I don't think I would have been a good engineer. I mean, I certainly had aptitudes for it, but part of what I had problems with is I was a little impatient. I got bored doing the same thing, for a focused amount of time. I loved certain aspects about it. I loved it. It's an incredibly creative field, and people, they really misunderstand the hard sciences when they go, oh, that's not creative like music or writing. It's like, it's absolutely as creative as all of those things. It's just in a different way. But if you don't have the sort of, you have to be meticulous. You have to be, there's so many factors that when I took a look at myself, I was like, I just don't think that's me, And so, maybe there was one job actually that I came so close to getting that I absolutely would have taken. It got down to the last two people at Apple Computer in the early 90s that I was going to be the engineering software evangelist in one of the absolute bottom terrible times, darkest times in Apple history. But they flew me out to Cupertino. I interviewed and I just didn't get the job. That job I would have taken. And now I look back, I go, oh, I would have been in Silicon Valley in the 90s. That may not have sucked.
Especially if they paid you in stock options back then.
And so, yeah, exactly.
It was like $8. It was $8 a share or something ridiculous.
I know. Anyway, so, but
being self-aware is very important. Being understanding that you're like, I've had staff jobs twice in my career in the film industry and been fired promptly from both. And it's just, I just am not, I work well with others, but it's not something I can't, it's not me. You just have to be aware.
Yep. It's a tough thing. It's like, being in a staff, it's so interesting. Like you get different, it's so personality driven. It's like, especially television. It's like, it is I've seen playwrights who are amazing, who just can't deal with being in a room. Feature guys who are like completely used to like going off for weeks and thinking about 3 lines of dialogue. It's like, they can't handle the pace. It's like, and people who are just not gregarious, because it's such a social thing. It's such a group collaboration, it's like a true collaboration. if you have the right mindset and you enjoy that, it's an incredibly fun experience. That's one of the things I love about television. It's part of the reason I think I've been in it for so long.
So you get onto Star Trek Next Generation, which is arguably one of the pinnacle sci-fi shows, arguably television shows. I mean, it was just so well written. It was so, but it's just so well written. I mean, you could go back to those episodes now and you're just like, damn, man, they hold up. I mean, the effects and the makeup, maybe not so much, but the writing is solid. Some of those storylines, I remember watching them in high school when I was coming up. I was just like, damn, man, this was really well written. What were some of the lessons you learned from that first job? I'm like, when you walked on the set for the first time, what was that feeling like?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, the thing was, Star Trek was an unusual show in a lot of ways and an unusual structure. It was the first show that was, really that kind of opened the syndication market. I mean, this is a long time ago. And so, it wasn't a network show, but it was a very high profile show. It was the reboot of this thing, which had been, before the word reboot existed, it was this thing that was kind of beloved, and but it was its own thing, but very different from the show. It went through its own kind of struggles at the beginning. What was unique about it, I think, was as a learning experience, because what had happened on Next Generation was at the end of the third season, which I think that was the third season, I think was Ron's first season on the show. The entire writing staff got fired except for Ron, and Michael Piller, who was the showrunner, kept Ron on and kind of rebuilt the show in his image in a way, and just in terms of how stories were told and when I got there, by the time Star Trek ended, the last two seasons, I was like a freelance in season 5, and then 6 and 7 I was on the show. It was a very young staff. Everybody was a first timer. It was their first gig in the business. It was Ron Moore, Brandon Braga, Renee Echevarria, and myself, and we were the core staff. Jerry Taylor was our boss, supervising producer who basically ran the room with us. But it was just kind of like all first timers. We had never had other gigs before. It was really, really spirited, good. We all liked each other. We're all still friends to this day. It's, and Jerry had, essentially taken the position like, look, this is a room where best idea wins. That was like, Mike Nichols, like his mantra. And so the arguments were passionate, but it was fun. Nobody was mean to anybody. And Michael was he was a really good editor. He gave us great discipline with how to break a story. So as a school, it was a tremendous school for learning how to do sort of the work of television writing. And so it was great discipline. And I think that all of us took, into our careers, into the rooms that we have run ourselves and the shows that we've made. So that was kind of amazing. There was also there was this rigid wall between the writing staff and the production, because Rick Berman was in charge of sort of that side of it. Initially, writers weren't allowed to go to the set. They didn't want us anywhere near the cast. It was it was, and that's slowly changed over the years. And I think, being fair, as wonderful as many of the episodes of Next Generation are, and there are some terrific episodes that really hold up to this day, it was very much a creature of its time. I think it owes a lot to television in the 80s, highly episodic in structure. It's kind of hitting the reset button every week. It was also, going to the people of the planet with the problem. Right. It was it sort of had that vibe to it.
There was a red shirt.
Exactly. That guy, that guy was, he was not going to make it. And so, and it's slowly loosened up. I always, I think Ron has said this too in his interviews over the years. What he did with Galactica was as much a reaction to Next Generation, in a lot of ways. Deep Space Nine got much, I think much more complex and dirtier in many ways, in good ways. That was always a struggle the young guys had with the bosses, because they felt that they were this was Gene Roddenberry's, dictum. This is the story that we wanted to tell, and how Next Generation was. People were kind of perfect, and they'd gotten past all of the terrible parts of human nature. And we were like, but that's where the fun is.
You have no conflict. You have no conflict. You have no story.
that is really the issue. And the first script that I wrote with Ron was the First Duty, which was about like the Will Wheaton's character Wesley Crusher, like lying, to protect his friends. And we're like, he would never lie. And it's like, of course he would lie. And that was, he's a kid. Exactly. It's like, and that's how you view the world. And so, those are so to some extent, that show was like a bit like writing in a straitjacket in some ways. In many other ways, it was a phenomenal training ground and a great way to learn the discipline of writing. And so I look back very fondly on those years, and it was a great staff. And I think it's very rare to this day when you have so many, like all of us first timers, we've all gone on to do so many things. It doesn't always happen that way. And I think it was a special staff.
And it was an anomaly too. I mean, that was just a special place at a special time when things like that happened. It was almost Wild West like, to bring in a group of first timers in a writer's room. It doesn't happen now, does it?
It doesn't, because what happened was Ron was hired off of a spec script. Renee was hired off of a spec script. Brandon was an intern for the Television Academy. I was an intern through the Writers Guild. Again, no experience in the business. But part of it was also, in as successful as Next Generation was, it was also a backwater. It was like, oh, Star Trek, it's just its own weird thing. And like coming off of that show, agents wouldn't even want to read a Star Trek script. They wouldn't. It's like, oh, can you do like a real show? It's like, that was kind of the attitude.
I remember that. I do remember that. It really
was.
It was like, oh, that's a movie they do for the geeks, and that's before geekdom was where the money was.
And it took like, I do remember, like probably about 10 years later or so after leaving Next Gen, somebody told me, oh, they want people that come from the Star Trek school, because they understood that to use a sports metaphor, that coaching tree was actually incredibly applicable to anything, which is what we always would say. It's like, in the context of a science fiction, in the context of Star Trek, we would do a legal show, a murder mystery, an epic drama. It's like,
noir,
a version of Shakespeare, a noir. It's like everything. It's like that science fiction was a superset of genres. It was never treated that way. And I think that the business actually became educated to it. And now it's like, I mean, and, here
we are. We're now. Now we have geek beyond everything is geek now.
Exactly.
There's no outskirts now.
No.
So I told you before we started the recording that you and I have a connection, sir.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Tell me.
Orlando 95.
Orlando 95.
Seaquest.
Oh my God. Yes.
I was working downstairs on Fortune Hunter for Fox.
Oh my God.
You remember that? Do you remember?
I do remember that show.
So I worked as a PA on an office PA on Fortune Hunter. And then on my side hustle, I worked on the other show that was right underneath your office, which was the Muse, which was the sketch comedy show, syndicated show. And I was working. Kidding. Yeah. So I was there during that season. I was there when I was there in between the last season. So it was when Roy was his last season, Roy Scheider's last season, and then Michael Ironside. So that's when I went to Full Sail.
That is the third season of the show. That's the 1 year I was on Seaquest. Fortune Hunter, was that Steve Aspas's show?
No, that was Boris. The guy who did Swamp Thing was his big thing. He did Swamp Thing show.
Okay.
Back then,
okay.
Yeah. So Fortune Hunter, it was Fortune Hunter. It was on for one season, did 12 episodes. And then it got canceled, but it was on Fox. I was so excited to just be working on a show that I can go on Saturday night and just like, look, my name's in the credits. Like, it was like,
Yeah.
And then
I never got down to Orlando. Because we had, I never got down because all the writers and posts were based in Los Angeles, right at Universal.
Oh, and I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and the bosses went down to Orlando, but I never got to. And I think I was supposed to, but we got canceled like after 13 or 12 episodes that season. I can't remember, but because I didn't know any of the. I knew a couple of the guys up in PAs and stuff like that. But I was on the set of Seaquest all the time and walking around, and I would bring in relatives. That was a crazy time, man. That show was bananas. That
Oh,
shit was bananas.
it was insane. I remember working because I worked at MGM and then I also at the MGM Studios on I think for one of the shows, and then they set up at Universal, and man, like the kid star would like jump out of the tours would have to stop, and then there's like Roy Schreider walking around, and I'm like, where am I? And this is Orlando.
Yep. I know.
So that is our slight connection, sir.
Oh my God. I was sad, actually. I never got to go down there because the show looked great. I mean, it had many problems on the page, but the physical production and the sets were beautiful. They were really well done.
Were stunning. The set was well done. So the set that I worked on was right next door to the soundstage. Was right next door to Seaquest, and then you see Seaquest props all over the damn back. I mean, it was just so many vehicles and stuff like that. It was so cool, man. Yeah, but again, when you're starting out, like it was like the coolest thing ever. And it was the 90s.
Well, it was, I mean, I do remember those days. Like we would go down to the bridge when it wasn't obviously in use and eat lunch down there on the Enterprise, because what was cool about the set would close up. And for those days, I mean, it was like, internally lit, the ceiling would come down. And so you could just sit on the bridge and like, eat a sandwich. And it was just kind of cool.
Warp speed to my Subway sandwich.
Exactly.
These are the things that like, people don't like, it was like eating lunch on the Enterprise. Like you take, those are the kind of little things that no one really knows about. No one hears about, but that's what you do in the production when you're there. Oh yeah. I used to sneak on the set of Seaquest.
Yeah, of course.
Constantly on the weekends when nobody was there, I'd bring relatives in from out of town and I would walk in.
they had those built-in tubes for Darwin, which were real. I mean, it's like an animatronic fish is like, and it's like, that was a beautifully designed set. It really was.
It was pretty stunning. It was pretty, for its time, it was insane.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was insane. Yep. Now, so how many times, so I mean, you've been working on set you've been working in television for many years now. Yeah. Can you pinpoint one of the worst days of something going wrong? Like something the day you're losing light, something really bad happens. And how did you overcome that day?
Well, the one that really kind of sticks out is I was doing a show for NBC called UC Undercover. It was early 2000. It was on for one season, so it was 2001, and so I had written, it was basically about the U.S. Marshal Service, and it had Odette Fair was the star, Vera Farmiga that was kind of her first show. I mean, it's like, so great look, great production. Shane Salerno created it. It was his first show as a showrunner, and I was the number 2 brought in there. I had written a script about domestic terrorism, a couple of psychopathic brothers who were I
already know where you're going. I already know where you're going with this.
I'm going. And the script opened with a sarin gas attack at a football game in which I had like 100 people die. And my wife would read my scripts and she'd go, "That's too many. That's just ridiculous. It's like, there's no way that could happen." So I write the script. We are in prep and I'm in bed. And I get a call, my phone rings, it's Shane, and he goes, "Terrorists just slammed into the World Trade Center. We're throwing out the script. We're shutting down. We'll talk later." And it was like, that was a surreal moment. We went back to the office like 2 days later, a day later. The whole writing staff was like, "What do we do?" Anyone living during that time knows. You were just in a daze. What do we do? We were in an absolute daze. We have no script. The director, who was being Ken Fink, who I worked with, for years on Seaquest, phenomenal director. We had to drive him up to Vancouver because there's no planes. So we put him in a truck with a Teamster and we drove him up to Vancouver because we needed a director to prep a show which we no longer had a script for. And there's this place in Vancouver that was called Crease Clinic. It was an old hospital from built in like the 40s or 50s, and it closed down and it had become like this place in Vancouver. You could turn it into anything. It could be a hospital, it could be a prison, it could be whatever, And so film shot. It was used for locations for a million things over the years. And so Shane goes, okay, we're gonna book that thing and we're gonna make a prison riot episode. And we're like, okay. And so the whole staff, and this show was, I just have to say, was a messed up nightmare. It was like every episode was some various form of disaster, highly dysfunctional in many ways. It was like people quitting. It was a crazy experience. And I'm actually fond of Shane, but it was a nutty experience. But this was like the one time where everybody just pulled together because we just had to get it done. And so we broke a story. We each wrote an act, turned it around real fast, sent the acts one by one up to production. Ken was like, I'm cool. It's like everybody just got their shit together, and the episode turned out great. It was like one of the best episodes of the show. And it was a terrible moment. And I still have trouble. I've looked at that script like once or twice, but it's hard to disconnect it from the experience of that time. And yeah, it was just, that was like that. I still, the memories are very vivid. The memories are very vivid of that time.
That's a heck of a story, man. I mean, having to, got that phone call. Jesus, I could only imagine. Well, so, all right. So, you've been doing this again for a while. I've talked to so many writers at high levels in the business. The thing that always surprises me is that every single one of them deals with imposter syndrome. Is that something that you deal with still to this day? I'm like, oh my God, I'm just an engineer. Why am I here? Or does that kind of just go away as you go through?
I can't. How am I going to say this with no, I don't. I mean, it's good. I don't feel that way. I think there is I think what definitely happens is, and maybe imposter syndrome is a narrow way to define it, but it's like you go, oh my God, I've been so successful. Do I deserve this? It's like, that's part of it. And that is much more a psychological thing about yourself. And if you look at yourself as a good person or as a bad person or whatever person, or you're being too mean or you're being intolerant, whatever it is, those are things that are very complicated. And I think that those speak to that idea. It's like more like, do I deserve what I've been given? Because it is look, this is a low percentage success business. There's no question about it. And I think for me, it's like, I'm very open and frank about the fact that I think I just got lucky. I had the right friend, who, and he had the right friend, and it's just like, I kind of blundered into it. And, when I came out to LA, like a year and a half later, I was on staff. That's a ridiculous, like my wife would, she was an independent producer for years and she never quite got anything, running. She came so close, and it's like, she goes, you didn't pay your dues. And I'm like, I kind of didn't. I mean, it's like, I suppose I could lie and say, oh, look, I was in school for 10 years. It's like, but that's not, I didn't want to be a filmmaker. I didn't think that was a thing, it's like, so I think, to me, it's acknowledging the people who helped you and being humble about the role that luck plays in these things, right? It's like it is, you have to acknowledge that. It's like, I think, this idea that, oh, I'm successful because I deserve it, is like, well, maybe you have talents and skills and again, sure, but it is timing, luck, being in the right place at the right time. It's like, if you're convincing yourself that you're special, it's like, I don't think it's as simple as that. And so basically what I try to do is acknowledge that. I try to be very attentive to the notion that we are an apprenticeship based guild. It's like I take the idea of mentorship really seriously. And, I like bringing writers into the business, giving people chances, promoting from within, because those are all the things that, enabled me to get, further. So it's like, so I don't have imposter syndrome that way. I also feel like every single experience I have is a learning experience. It's like I take this back to, I did a lot of martial arts when I was in college, and the first time our sensei came in to teach us, it's like he busted everybody's ass, and at the end of the class was like, here's it's like, and he said, remember how you feel this way. You feel stupid. You feel like you don't know anything. You feel like you're bad. It's like, he goes, keep that idea in your head. It's called fresh mind. It's like there's always more to learn. There's always things you don't know, and you just keep that idea in the business, and then it's like, then it's joyful, right? You're always learning. You're learning from other people. You're learning new skills. You don't ever have to be the person, and you shouldn't be the person that says, oh no, I know everything. I know how it absolutely has to be. It's like, and so that's sort of how I approach it.
And of course, you've never met anybody in Hollywood that acts that way. Of course. Never, nobody, right?
Never. Oh my God. There are meetings, like the couple of times I dabbled in features that were so hilarious. It was like my first time I got to write a feature. It was this, I wouldn't even specifically give you the names, but it was like, sure. It was adapting a novel, which is like this thriller, sort of with a slight science fiction bent. And the producer had the book. The first thing he said was, throw away the one science fiction thing that made the book special. And I was like, what? And then he proceeded to draw a graph for me about how the audience should feel at any moment in a thing. I was like, yeah, they got to be here, and then they got to be there, and then it's like, and then you got to build up here. And I'm like, and I was literally, I just, there's one guy in the room that I knew. I was like, I turned to him and I was like, what is he talking about? I didn't even understand what was happening. And it's like, I've been on staff for years at this point. I go, what are you talking about? It's like, wow. It was so mechanical. And it was, I don't know if it was like the Robert McKee thing. It was like, you're saying, you got to have this here, and got to do this here, and got to do this here. Like, it's like,
he might have read The Hero's Journey, and then just all of a sudden.
I mean, it's like, but it was so mechanical. It's like, you must write a story this way. And I'm like, must we?
On page 17, this happens. On page 27, this happens. Like, it's,
I didn't like, why must it happen? Don't we have some control over that?
we're the ones creating this, right?
Like,
so we can.
I don't know.
That's funny. That is funny. So you worked on another little show called CSI for a couple of years. Yeah. Small independent show just started out. You worked on that for a while, if I'm not mistaken, right?
8 years. Yeah.
8 years on that. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, how do you approach? Because I know a lot of writers coming up don't know this. How do you approach procedural storytelling for a procedural show like CSI, which has an overarching arc of a story for the characters, but there's a new body, the new death, a new mystery every week, as opposed to like The Expanse, which is much more of a narrative, storytelling with a full arc without the individual daily or weekly things. How do you approach that storytelling differently?
Well, I mean, procedural, every show is its own sort of specific problem in one way or another. And with CSI, the classic 1 hour mystery has a lot of built-in inherent structure to it. If the intention is to solve a crime, it's like it naturally goes in a particular way. And CSI had those rhythms built in, right? It's like, you have to start with a crime. You have to have different theories of the crime. There has to be some resolution to the case. So in a sense, the kind of show that you're telling dictated that structure. Now, you can say that's formulaic. Yeah, I mean, to an extent, but it's also, it's like, couldn't you say the same that any detective mystery novel is formulaic? Sure. Right. And
there's a crime. You got to figure it out. It's at the end of the day, that's it. Right. A Sherlock Holmes story is a Sherlock Holmes story. Period.
Is a Sherlock Holmes story. Exactly. So you have to embrace that to some extent. I mean, I was probably the most, experimental of the writers on that, the bosses and writers on that show, is because I was constantly looking for ways to break the format and to change things and make things, because I felt that was something that you could do in a show is that successful. Is that, and I think that we were much more experimental than we needed to be. Like, I think we were much more experimental than Law and Order was. Law and Order was like a rhythm, right? And so I tried to break those rhythms in a lot of different ways over the years. But again, I could point to episodes of CSI that are like straight formula episodes of the show that are phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what I liked about that show was it was a different way to tell a mystery story. I watched it first as a fan. I mean, it's like, and by the way, hilariously, I was working on a show when CSI came out, and as an anthology science fiction show, and the other one of the other writers on the show goes, you just because of the way I thought, or it's like we would talk about. So he goes, "You'd be perfect for that show, for CSI." And I go, "I'd rather be dead than tell mystery stories." That's like, fucking hell, man. That's just a nightmare. You got to come up with a crime, then you come up with, it's like, and then of course, then 2 years later, I'm on the show. And
I mean, it is. I mean, thinking about it as a writer, you're just like, man, how do you got to come up with a crime every week? And it can't just be like, oh, someone got stabbed. It's got to be like some crazy thing to make it interesting.
I think the way I approached it, and the thing I liked about it was, in the early years of the show, it was a very serious crime drama. It was done with incredible high style. I mean, that was really, Jerry Bruckheimer. He wanted it to look a particular way, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was like, and it was very, very striking on the technical side. And it really used, like almost like a fashion photography, sort of like a quality to it. And it was
very 90s. Had 90s to early 2000s style, Bruckheimer style
in it. But you look at it, it still looks beautiful. It has a look, and I think the television so often didn't have a look, that it was so beautiful just to watch, right? And so that was part of its appeal. But also it was the inherent message of the show, which was that, and expressed by Billy Peterson's character so many times. It was like, if you're smart, if you're methodical, if you don't let yourself get confused by lies, just objectively approach the evidence and the facts in the case, that you'll get to the truth. That to me is the DNA of the show. And so it was, there's so many times when, the show with this unique approach told a mystery story and a crime story in a different way. That's really what I liked about it. The show, as it got bigger and bigger and more successful, there was a pressure on it, I think, to become much more sensationalized, much more fetishized. I think the show in its later years really kind of grotesquely fetishized violence. It was part of the thing that I didn't like as I was towards the end of my time there, because one of our consultants on the show was a criminalist with the LA County Sheriff's Department, said, and this line made it into the show. It's like, she said, we meet people on the worst day of their lives. Oh, it's like, and what she was talking about was understanding and the psychological trauma and connection to loss that these crimes had. And the show had that focus very early on, and it got further and further away from it as the show went on. And I found that very disheartening. And it was like, there's a beautiful episode from the second season of the show called Chaos Theory. And it's basically every act is like, there's this girl who dies, a college student dies, and they can't figure out what has happened. Each act, they follow a promising lead to a dead end. And then the next act is, okay, let's look at something else. And at the end of it, what they realize is it's just some crazy accident. It's like she was trying to get a cab in the rain, and she gets hit by a car and knocked literally into a dumpster. And it's just a random occurrence. It's just a tragedy. And Billy Peterson's character tells this to the parents, and the parents go, "No, we refuse to accept that. No way. There's no way it could have been something like that." And they just leave angry. And he doesn't understand. He goes, "I thought the truth would actually make them feel better." And Mark Helgenberger's character says, it's like, that's not what's happening here. You got to understand that. That's a deep idea, and it's like, those are the things the show did early on that they did less and less of, that the show did less and less of later on. And so I think it kind of went away from I think its true mission. But it also did some great episodes later. I mean, we did, one of my favorites was, it was an episode called Killer. And it was the first episode of the show. It's like, we revealed the murderer at the beginning. Who killed from the beginnings. William Sadler did this part, and Ken Fink directed it. It's a beautiful episode. It's not a whodunit, it's a why done it. It turned it a little bit on its head, is that you develop the personality of this person, you understand what he did and why he did it over the course of the episode. And it's just it's one of my favorites of the entire time. And then we did kind of style breaking episodes as we ended up having a lot of lab technicians on the show who were great comic actors. Wally Langham, Liz Vassy. It's sure. They were fun, and they were being underused. They'd come on the show because they were, but they were being underused. So I started these episodes called the Lab Rats episodes, which were once a season, we would turn the entire show over to the supporting characters and just do like a black comedy. And they became like one of my favorite things. It's like we introduced them in a season where we had like an ongoing arc about a killer who leaves perfect scale miniatures of crime scenes at crime scenes, which is probably my favorite season of the show. But the Lab Rats like make this incredible break in the case, like in their one little episode. And then year by year we would do other shows. And maybe the most fun was one called, I think it was called You Kill Me, which is the entire show is the Lab Rats discussing about how they would murder each other. It's like how they would just murder people, and it's just like hilarious, imagined
dark,
crimes. Exactly. So dark humor. And it's like, I loved working with those guys. Liz Vassy and I are good friends now. And,
that's awesome.
Anyways, they were super fun. And so the show had lots of rhythms. I think it became culturally more of a caricature in some ways.
Well, a generation of women specifically really became CSI investigators because of that show. I mean,
that's one of the things I loved about it. It's like when the show started, there were like 5 forensic programs around the country, and 10 years into it, there were like 500.
I mean, it became a real thing. So the show did a lot of good.
It did. It absolutely did.
It did a lot of good for the world and you can't say that about many shows.
I like that. I feel like Star Trek was that way. It had that quality. CSI was that way. I mean, especially with women, because again, I think it's like they're disproportionate. It was not a show in which you resolved conflicts with violence. It was you thought your way through them, and so many times, people would come up, like a mother and her 12-year-old daughter. It's like, this is our favorite show. We watch it together.
Wow.
It's like, I know. And I'd be like, that's kind of intense. But it is it's just an interesting observation. It's like they would always gravitate to the puzzle solving aspect of it.
Now, obviously you've worked in a lot of rooms over the years. There's this kind of unspoken rule or unspoken information about the politics of a writer's room. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what the politics are in the writer's room as far as a young writer walking into it, so they understand what's going on?
Unspoken politics in the writer's room. How do you mean? Could you elaborate on that?
So just kind of like how, because I know that every showrunner runs differently. Sometimes they're in the rooms and run the actual room. Sometimes they have, the second in command runs the room. Yep. How to speak, what not to do. Don't try to, when you're throwing out ideas, don't throw out the problem, throw out the solution. These kind of ideas. I've picked this up just from interviewing showrunners. Yeah. So those kind of things that a young writer might not understand about a writer's room, and maybe listening to this will give them an idea of how they should approach being in a room. Not some people are too quiet, some people are too out there. You know, everyone. I know there was one writer I had on the show that he's a showrunner, but when he was a writer, he's like, yeah, I just kept throwing out. I solved the ideas for everything. And the showrunner's like, wow, in your universe, everything gets solved right away. It things like this. So these are those little things. I just love to hear it from you, what your opinion is.
You know, every room is different. Everybody who runs a show runs a room a little differently. I can only really tell you how the way I look at things, and also sort of describe what I think are, you know, the bad rooms that I've seen run.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I feel like there are maybe the extremes are one in which everybody is trying to please the boss, in which it is, you know, step on everybody else to get your hand raised, and so you get noticed. Some people run rooms that way. Some people are very absent. They let their second do something, and then they come in and they blow everything up and say, you're all stupid, and then they leave. It's like, that happens as well. It's like, I feel like I don't think it's really a good idea for showrunners to be out of the room. It's like a lot of bad showrunners, I think they say, well, I gotta go fix episode 5. It's like a disaster. I'll go fix it in editing. The reason everybody hides out in editing and why it's a very bad sign is because you don't have to deal with another person's opinion. You don't have to defend anything really, because all you say, do that, is pure control. And so it's a hiding out kind of a behavior. The best rooms that I have ever been in, and the way I try to conduct ours is again, it's that best idea wins. Everybody has a voice. Everybody gets to make a contribution. Everybody needs to listen to everybody else. If an idea isn't strong enough and it can't withstand an argument, then you need a better idea. And that is, there's no hierarchy. Everybody's voice is equal. I've taken notes from our, suggestions from our PAs, it's like who are sitting there in the room. It doesn't matter to me. It's like my job is probably like a hand on the rudder, right? It's like I have to guide it. I have to give it shape sometimes. If the question is, should the dress be red or the dress be blue? If I like red, then the dress is red. That's an aesthetic, decision. Sure. If I have an idea for a character or a moment and somebody goes, that just doesn't make any sense. This character would never do that. And if the argument is good, then change it, right? Is the answer. It's like you have to have the courage to do that. And I think part of it for me goes back to my background in hard science, because it's essentially peer review, right? You write a paper, you put it up, and then you sit back with your colleagues, and then you question the fundamentals of it. You question the foundation of it. Is it, and that's what that is, right? And so you have to have that. It's like that kind of, and when everybody feels comfortable, like that they're going to be listened to, that everybody can make a contribution, I think you get the best out of people that way. And I treat departments on the physical production side the same way. It's like these people are experts in what they do. It's like I don't tell them how to make everything. I can tell them what I'm looking for, but then let them go and be creative. Right. You don't micromanage. You don't micromanage. There's an inevitable amount of micromanagement that happens because it's hierarchical, right? Everybody is responsible for a piece of it. Every department is responsible for a piece of it. But the people who are responsible for the whole thing, it's basically, on my shows, that's basically me, right? I'm the one that ultimately says, this is the shape of it. This is the story we want to tell. This is the cut. This is the, the sound. This is the music. It's like, but you're going to get a better thing if everybody at every stage of that process gets to make the thing that they do really, really well. All you have to do is guide them, because you're just going to get tremendous stuff out of people, I think, that way. And that's how I prefer to do it.
Now, is there a piece of advice you wish someone would have told you at the beginning of your career? If you can go back and tell yourself when you were sleeping on that couch back in the day, is there something that you wish you would have known?
I actually had the initial, my formative experiences in the business were really positive ones. They really were. Star Trek was a very positive place to learn, good people, good stories, a stable place for several years. Seaquest, it's a lot of negative examples. It's like things that were very clear that you shouldn't do. But at that point, I was confident enough in my own abilities that I could understand those. The Outer Limits was my next gig, which I did for 3 years, the Showtime anthology show, which was a phenomenal training ground just to learn almost every aspect of production, because in an anthology, you're creating a new world, building it, making it, and the range of shows you got to do were tremendous. I mean, because we did, an old Western, and then a futuristic show, then a spaceship show, and then a contemporary show. And it's like all like one after another. And so the amount of learning you get for literally any kind of production problem was astonishing,
That's awesome.
And so, I think I just got lucky in that sense. I just got good experiences up front. So I think, and good mentors, who were, who gave me a lot of opportunities and a lot of freedom. So
now, how did you get involved with The Expanse, man? Because that's been doing pretty well for you over the years. And I just had Thomas on, by the way. I just had Thomas on the show.
He's great.
Thomas is like, awesome. Oh my God, Thomas Jane is just an amazing human being. He's sitting there with his pipe, clicking on his pipe. He has skulls in the background, and I'm like, Thomas, the level of cool that you are is just, it's natural too. It's not manufactured. And you could see it in Expanse too. You could see that cool just come right off the street. It's pretty amazing.
He was such a delight to work with. And I think initially he was, he's a little guarded when you're getting to know him. And I think he was guarded about just sort of like attaching himself to this weird thing on the SyFy Channel. But, he really, I think Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby wrote the pilot. I think he really connected with Mark and just in sort of the love of the same kind of movies. And Tom is such a cinephile. It's like, oh my God, like hardcore. And then I think he became, he started trusting us when we were delivering on the things that we said we were going to do in a way that we were going to do it. And I think that by the end of it, he became he was really choked up, like on his last days of, leaving the show. And it was really, I think he feels proud of the work that we did on The Expanse.
So how did you get involved with The Expanse?
I was like the last element. I was, because the books had been optioned by Alcon. Mark and Hawk had been attached to write the pilot. They had never done television before, so the pilot was sold to SyFy with an on-air commitment. And so, and Alcon was a small studio that done some, they did The Blind Side, but they'd done
Sure.
features and they were getting a little bit more in that space. But they had never done a television show before. And Sharon Hall, who's the president of Alcon at that time, I'd worked with her. She'd been at Sony for many years. We had done development together, and she thought I would be a good fit for the show. And so I just came in and met with the guys. And this was at the pilot stage. They just had a script. They didn't have, the production wasn't up and running. And so they just needed somebody, who could mount a show like this. And it was, to be honest, when I had been away from science fiction for a very long time, like 10 years almost. And I was not a fan of what, the SyFy Channel was putting on, because other than Battlestar Galactica, they had a pretty grim slate of things, and they would send me stuff every year and I go, ugh. And so my agent sent me the script and he said, it's on the SyFy Channel. And I went, doop, delete. And I just deleted it the first time. I just wouldn't even read it. And they came back to me like 3 weeks later and said, look, please read the script. They really want you. And this time I scroll to the bottom and I see that Mark and Hawk had written Children of Men.
Yeah.
And which I loved. And I'm like, okay, all right. And I didn't know the books. And so I read the script and I was like, are they really going to make this? It's like, because this is not like the thing that this is not the kind of material that they had embraced, but it was a new regime. Bill McGoldrick had come in there, and I met with the guys, and we talked about the script, and I liked them, and they liked me, and then there we go.
The rest, as they say, is history.
6 years later.
Now, Naren, I'm going to ask you a couple questions I ask all of my guests. 3 questions. What advice would you give a screenwriter trying to break into the business today?
It's tough. Realistically, it's a very difficult business to break into. One of the big changes in the business from when I started was you don't have this regular broadcast TV machine making a zillion episodes of a show. What you have are really big productions making way fewer episodes with much tighter staff. So the abilities to get into it are actually, I think, tougher. It's like, because the pathways have changed. It's like you don't really have a freelance writing market like you did 25, 30 years ago. The ways into the business are becoming a writer's assistant, which is a highly coveted job, becoming an executive producer's assistant, which is another pathway into the business. And so aspiring writers are always trying to find that way in. That's right. Because you can write scripts, you can get agents to read them, you can get put up to staff, there's always that available, but that's a numbers game too, right? Because it's like, you're just a lot of people in the business, but getting that shot at being in a room, really learning, it's just tough. I mean, it's like, so the key is write, network, and try to get one of those gigs, take advantage of internships and fellowships that are all, that are out there at the studios. Those are all really, really good programs, and the guilds, and that's really the trick. It's like, and even if the job is a PA's job that gets you in the writer's room, it's like, take it. You'll learn something. It's learn something. And if you show people something and a desire, it's like, hopefully if you're on the right people, they'll give you those opportunities and give you a chance to take a step up. I mean, we promoted several writers from writer's assistants and EP assistants on the Expanse. We did that on CSI. I mean, even into editorial director writers. Like, we did a lot of homegrown internal production, internal promotion. I'm a big believer in that. And I think that's the way things should work.
I'll tell you what, I mean, I learned more as a PA working in Orlando than I did at film school. I would skip school to just go and be on the set and learn, and being in the office and seeing how things run. And you just learn so much more than you do at a school, because you're just seeing it happen, and you're picking up things that are not in books and the teachers generally don't talk about, and like those nuances of stuff that go on set. You just, I remember the first day as a PA, they're like, a bunch of grips, like, you want to intern at the grip department? Or go to the grip department. First thing the grips did, there's a giant pile of cable that's like 15 miles long. Untangle that for me. Mm-hmm. I learned I didn't want to be a grip.
and the guys, that's hilarious. And when you're on a set, people will talk to you. They're happy to share knowledge with you. Everybody really does understand this sort of like inherent apprenticeship model, but you should never be afraid to ask questions. What's the worst that can happen? It's like, stop bothering me, we'll talk later. It's like, but I would be like, on CSI, we had this amazing experienced, focus puller, and his name was Gary Muller, and he had worked forever. Like he'd worked in the 50s and 60s for Billy Friedkin, and it's like, he was like a grouchy perfectionist, but like he knew everything. And whenever I had a question on CSI, I'd go like, hey, Gary, how does this work? He's like, I would go to Gary and ask him, and he'd tell me. And I remember I had this question about like lenses and lens systems, and CSI was really interesting because all of the effects almost all of them were practical in-camera effects. We didn't do any post-digital stuff really. So we experimented a lot. And I said, Gary, how does this work? It's like, I don't quite understand. And he goes, would you like me to take you to Panavision? And just go look at the cameras, and I'll teach you. And he arranged for a visit. We went on the weekend, and he said all of his years working, none of the bosses had asked him these questions. And it's like, I'm like, how the fuck do you learn? It's like, how do you learn? It's like, there's so many people who are afraid of looking stupid because they don't know something.
Right.
I say I don't know how that works all the time, or tell me how that works. And I know a lot. I've been doing this for a long time. It's like, but you gotta take those opportunities. There are people who know so much, and the knowledge is so specialized. And filmmaking is such a weird combination of pure creative and highly technical. It's like it's an unusual thing. And so, I think a lot of reasons these days that like writer showrunners, like what's happened a lot of times now, you see pairings like of a writer showrunner and then a producing director. It's like, because there's a whole side of post-production that that they're terrified of. People like to edit, but when you start talking about sound mixing, when you start talking about music, when you start talking about color and VFX, they just get, no, you do that. That's fine. You show me. It's like, I feel like that's a little bit like a director saying, we're just going to do half a movie. It's like,
you're right.
It's like all of those things are part of the experience. It's like, I have friends who, like, I remember I came into a meeting on some show and I was still doing post on the Expanse, and I said, sorry, it's like, our mix went 9 hours yesterday. And they're like, what? 9 hours? And I'm like, well, it's about normal. It's like a 7 or 9 hour mix is what I do. And it's like, I just go to playback and then just say, give them a couple notes and then I leave. I'm like, you're missing out on a lot of shit. Because you learn. Sound is half of the way you perceive the world. It's like,
and you could also see mistakes if there are any mistakes being made on set that because if you're just listening to a mix, you don't see the details. But you're like, man, this boom guy's not getting it. Oh man, it's like it's off or something's happening. The sound guy's not doing his job right. You're in the mix. You're literally in the mix.
You're literally in the mix. Yeah. So I feel like that's the deal. It's like you're just going to learn a lot doing that.
What lesson took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Okay, I'll limit it to the film industry because there's probably many things I'm still learning. Sure. I think I personally have a tendency to take on projects or ideas that I probably shouldn't because I want to prove that I can do it. And that sometimes is not good. It's like just to show somebody, oh yeah, you think that's not adaptable? Fuck it, I'll do it. And then I'll beat my head against it forever just to try to show somebody that. It's not necessarily the best way to really do something. I would do that on shows a lot. And I think I would also, I don't know. There's a sort of like a prove it mentality sometimes that's not healthy. And I think that maybe another aspect of that is I would, if something isn't working early in my career, I would force it. I would just try to ram my way through it and just make it happen. I got good advice saying, you know what? It's a creative thing. Maybe today isn't the day. Just step away from it and come back to it. Yeah. It's like, you have to learn that too. It's like, you have to learn when you're forcing. You have to learn when it's not being productive. And don't be afraid to just let it take a step back. Go for a walk or take a shower or go for a drive or something, because your brain sometimes needs time to make connections between things. And so I think I'm much more comfortable doing that now than I was early in my career, for sure.
And last question, what are 3 pilots that every screenwriter should read, or every television writer should read? Or episodes of a show?
It changes. I would say that changes era by era and, genre by genre. Like what's a great, if you like crime shows, right? Crimes and cop shows, like, what's a great show to watch now? You could make a lot of different, you could say The Sopranos if you wanted to go back a ways. You could say Mayor of Easton, so it's like, that's a very much of a moving target, because I used to collect like pilots that I thought were really, really terrific. The problem is, they may not be so terrific when you go back a few years. It's like, it really does change.
Like the Breaking Bad pilot still
Yeah.
absolute brilliant, even though it was so many years ago when that came out, but you just read it and you're just like, well, that's remarkable.
They can, and they do last. I mean, I think Game of Thrones is a terrific pilot.
Mad Men.
Yeah. Mad Men's a great pilot.
Yeah, Mad Men, Sopranos. I mean, David Chase's. I mean, Jesus, the first one. Yeah, there's so many. There are so many, but I just want.
I mean, I used to keep the X-Files. I loved that.
Yeah.
I think what it is for pilots, for me, it's like if you can think of pilots first episodes of shows that were tremendous, inevitably there are like one or two moments that are so striking that you always remember them. It's like, you feel
like a guy with a gun in his underwear, with a meth with a bago.
The very first image of Breaking Bad, right? It's like, but that's what I mean. It's like, I think those are the pilots that stick with you. It's like, even, independent of era or style or anything like that. I think that really is what it is.
Naren, man, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and experience with my tribe. And hopefully somebody listening out there is terrified now and won't be in the business, but or at least understands what they're getting into. Or you could just go get a degree in engineering and apply physics.
There are times where I really do go like, man, I got really lucky, and it is ridiculous that people pay me to tell stories and make cool shows for a living. It's like, it is just pinch me and, I'll do it as long as I can because it's really fun.
Man, it was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you again for being on the show, brother. I appreciate you.
My pleasure.